Mabuhay, everyone. This is Reverend Reg, and I'm here again for another episode of Perspective, where we encourage all our viewers to put things in perspective because your perspective shapes your reality. And today I am so happy and I am so grateful because I have a colleague of mine in the International Metaphysical Ministry who's going to share with us her personal growth journey and her amazing book, Gay the Pray Away. And just to give you all a brief background of our guest, she is a queer interfaith minister, speaker, author, and spiritual counselor. She leads a monthly gathering called Gay the Pray, helping the LGBTQ plus community find spiritual belonging and liberation. She also serves on the founding leadership and ministerial team of the Compassionate Consortium, an interfaith and interspecies religious center for vegans and animal lovers. Formerly a practicing mechanical engineer, Erica sees the world through a systems lens of interconnectivity, enthusiasm, and God's essence is her spiritual practice. Satnam, Reverend Satnam, Reverend Erika.
Thank you so much. Hello, I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, welcome. I'm so excited for us to have this interview because when I was growing up, I had to work on a lot of my insecurities and all the negative programmings. And in fact, when I was growing up, I didn't even realize that those were negative programmings. It just became acceptable beliefs. And for instance, Reverend, when I was growing up, I was really in search of a spiritual path and the spiritual teacher that I can relate to. And it was so difficult growing up because there was no one who would mirror my experience. And in fact, it just became acceptable to me that I will always feel second rate because I felt that, at least your family accepts you and they don't even bring it up for discussion. So that was enough. So I don't know what part of your personal growth experience you encountered that was similar to mine, but if you had anything similar, please share it because I feel so blessed that we're having this conversation this morning.
Yes, and I'm over in the East Coast of the United States, and we're having this conversation this evening. So
Yeah.
the magic of time zones. But yes, Rev Reg, my story is also quite similar. When I was growing up in a kind of conservative Christian household and
Mhm.
community, when I realized I was gay, when I realized I was queer, it really wasn't acceptable. It wasn't acceptable in the community, in the church, and definitely not in my family. And so,
Mhm.
one of the challenges was around the age of, being a teenager, 18 years old, when I'm still developing as a human being, having
Mhm.
my parents and my church tell me that who I was not okay, was not acceptable, was wrong, was not lovable, was not worthy. All of those messages were just, I shoved them deep down inside because they were really painful to think that they are real. But that was the reality at the time of people just didn't understand that this is how people are. And we have to love everyone for exactly who they are and not tell them that they need to change who they are. And in my case in the US, I experienced something that's called conversion therapy. And I think
Mhm.
that happens globally, so it's not just in the US, but conversion therapy is a kind of technique where they try to change your sexual orientation or your gender identity. So they use counseling and therapy and sometimes even more severe practices than that to try to convince you or make you not gay anymore. And so I experienced that. I experienced counselors trying to change me, trying to pray the gay away. That's kind of how they term it. That if we pray hard enough, that this gay thing can go away. And it didn't work. It doesn't work. It's not something that can it's not something that is been shown by science or practice to be effective. And why would we want it to be? Because being gay is part of who I am. So it's not really something that anyone should be trying to change. It's part of my beautiful, unique design as a human being, as part of the diversity of our amazing creation.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. I'm so profoundly grateful that you're sharing this because I'm not sure if you read it, but I post a thread in our international metaphysical ministry group. And honestly, for me, I'm already 36 years old and I have gotten over a lot of the major issues of me being gay. But a big part of me feels that I want to serve the community, not just the growing, not just the adolescents who are going through their development right now, but even the ones who have been badly uh, felt limited psychologically
Yes.
and felt spiritually ostracized, because I have a lot of clients who are much, much older than me, and they find comfort in having conversations with me because they feel compassionate care about their situation. And I love that you brought it up because honestly, I don't have any experience with conversion therapy because I never really had that opportunity, and I'm so grateful I never had it. And another thing is that conversion therapy for some very conservative religious communities, they actually do practice it even here in the Philippines. So it's something that is very damaging psychologically, as like what you mentioned, it
Yeah.
doesn't have any scientific basis. And going back to that psychological aspect, I think also for the lack of psychology subjects in many different courses, that's why a lot of people find it acceptable to just shrug it off, and at the same time to take things lightly because they have no idea what happens in the inner conversations, the mental aspect of being gay. Especially one of the things that I shared in our IMM community was Portia de Rossi's explanation of her not coming out early on, where she said that she felt that it's okay to be an actress and just hide being gay so that she can
Yeah.
maintain the financial flow of her career, which is being an actress and not being openly gay. So this is the aspect that most families, most colleagues and friends who are not gay don't understand, that there's a psychological thought process and even emotional wiring that most LGBTQ individuals go through, that most people are oblivious, especially if they didn't have that kind of experience. So please share more about it because I read your book and I'm so grateful that it was done in such a way that it was very thoughtful. And I know how much love you put into your work because you won't be able to pinpoint those details if you didn't actually have that kind of thorough work done. So please share more about what's happening in the internal aspect because this is the part where I think most people need to be aware.
Yeah, this was my biggest discovery in going through conversion therapy. I mean, for me, it didn't work. I didn't become straight. I didn't turn away from being gay. And so for much of my life, I assumed that because it didn't hurt, it's because it didn't work for me, it also didn't hurt me, right? Like kind of like no harm, no foul. But what's interesting is as I got older, I started to realize, like I got started to notice places in my life that I was sabotaging myself. I would notice like patterns of relationships that ultimately I would end up leaving a relationship because I felt like, I just wasn't being fulfilled in some way. Or same with my career. Like I couldn't figure out what to do for my career. And when I really unpacked all of that, I realized it's because I was carrying around these deeply internalized messages. And if I trace it back to conversion therapy, I can tell you exactly where the messages came from. So here's one, for example. So the way conversion therapy worked for me is that people would tell the counselor I worked with would try to find areas where I was sad or angry or hurt or depressed or anxious. And rather than trying to like help me with those, the counselor would use those experiences to tell me, well, see, that's proof that you shouldn't be gay. That's proof that you're out of alignment with God's plan for your life. And so what I took in as messages was I can't be vulnerable. If I'm vulnerable, if I show that I'm sad, if I show that I'm angry, if I show that I'm hurt or depressed or anxious, somebody's going to use that against me. So I have to put on a front. I have to put on a front and a cover and a mask and just be very strong and happy all the time and only good stuff. Because if I show anything weak, that's going to be used against me. So that was one. And so you can imagine, like when I was a kid, that was important because it kept me safe and it kept me alive. But as I got older and I tried to be in relationships with people and I wouldn't be able to be vulnerable, that's not a very good recipe for success in a relationship, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one piece, but then there's other ones too. Like for example, this inner judge piece. Like I realized I didn't want to show up in the world. I didn't want to put myself out there in the world and shine. Like you have your own radio show and you have your own TV show and like you do these things where you're putting yourself out there. And I don't think others in the straight community realize how much work it takes for us to be able to put ourselves out there like that because
Yes.
of what we've experienced in the past. There's a lot of work that goes into our psychological state and our emotional state to be able to shine that way. And I was noticing that for myself. I was afraid to really put myself out there because I was afraid of judgment. I was afraid of, more people telling me who I was not okay. And what I came to learn is that I had an inner judge inside of me, an inner voice that was telling me I wasn't okay. And so if anybody outside agreed, it just confirmed my inner judge that my judge was right the whole time. So that was painful. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. And then the last one I'll mention just quickly is that I also learned that, my church told me that how I felt inside was just Satan trying to trick me. That was one of the things they told me, right? So if I felt attracted to a woman, that's because Satan was tricking me with my own emotions. So basically, I walked away from that experience internalizing that I can't trust myself. I can't trust my gut. I can't trust my emotions. I can't trust my intuition. I can't trust anything I feel because it's Satan trying to trick me. So again, like imagine going through life as an adult and but at that point, all I could rely on was my mind. And any of us who have done any work in meditation or mindfulness or anything where you observe the mind, you realize that that's not who you want to be listening to all the time. The mind can be a little bit, the mind has stories. The mind makes things up. The mind tries to protect us and manage our risks and keep us safe. So it's been a journey for me to tap back into the wisdom of my body, my heart, my emotions, my intuition, my guts, places in me that have a lot to share and guide me, where I was told I couldn't listen to those things. So those are just some examples of the way, if anybody out there is wondering, oh, I wonder if I wonder if I'm still carrying around baggage or wounding from my experience being younger and being told who I was not okay. Check for some of those signs. Like, can you trust yourself? Do you feel like you can really trust yourself? Do you feel like you're sabotaging relationships or you can't figure out what you want to do for a living? All of these are little indicators that you may be carrying around inner voices of self-judgment that are still holding you back today.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that because one of the things that I would hear from people close to me is that I'm hallucinating. So,
Mm,
if you're young, even as an adult, and then people project those kinds of labels on you, if you're not meditating and if you're not tuning into your heart's guidance constantly, you're just going to accept that and definitely you're going to screw up
yeah,
because the bigger part of you knows that you're meant for something greater. But if you listen to people who will not be able to comprehend the divine plan for you, they're going to project their fears and their doubts on your capacity to deliver.
yes,
And, Reverend Erica, I thank you so much for doing this because you just gave me a confirmation that I'm not the only one who's thinking these things.
that's good.
And it's so important to have someone like you to share space with, that it's okay to trust your instincts, it's okay to trust your inner guidance. And at the same time, one thing that I also want to share is that your book, I realized that when I was reading the chapters of your book, it's so amazing because you know, when you're drawing something and you feel like it's just two-dimensional, it's just the pen and the paper. But then when I read the chapters of your book, I felt that, she understands the layers of how the mind works. And this is exactly the part where most straight people miss out on. That's why they think, just don't think about it because I'm accepting you. What's the problem? And
Yeah.
I know we talked about this, and for people who are just trying to reconcile their inner guidance system from what we're talking about now, what do you think is the best way for them to access the guidance from their true, full, authentic selves and be able to separate that from the voices that's just coming up in their consciousness because they've been programmed by religion, they've been programmed by the fears and doubts of their family as to what they're truly capable of accomplishing.
Yeah, in the book I talk about that as there's 7 steps in the book. It's called the Rainbow Path that I guide people through, and the B, so every letter of the word rainbow is a step on the path. It's an acronym, and it's the gayest acronym I could think of, Rainbow Path. But the B in rainbow is build your inner compass. And in the book I talk about how if your inner compass has been taken offline because you've received a lot of outer programming telling you you can't trust yourself, or no, you're not right, this is the right thing. Anytime these external systems have told you what's right for you, that can take that inner compass offline, and you start to listen to, I mean, especially parents or authority figures, right? Like that was one of my challenges, was my whole
Yes.
life my parents, they knew I was a kid, they were the adults, I trusted them, I thought they knew best. Same with my church. Why would I think that my church would have it wrong? Like I had looked up to them as a kid my whole life, and I figured they must know what they're talking about. But there comes a point, and the first step I would tell people is like really establish yourself in the present moment. And are there people or systems you're still listening to outside of yourself because you used to listen to them when you were younger or when you were a kid, or you weren't as wise and you weren't as powerful as you are right now today in this moment? Some of it might be old programming. And that was what I had to do for me. And I think people can relate to this. At some point, I had to take my parents off the position, off the throne of being the ones who know best for me. And I had to say, no, actually, I'm an adult now and I know best for me. And you're doing the best you can. And I love you, parents, but you don't know more about my life and my journey and my path than I do. I actually now have to take charge of my life and my journey. So the first step I would recommend to people is just check in with yourself and see, do you really feel like you're listening to you, or do you feel like you have given power to other
Yes.
people or systems or structures or authority figures to know more than you? It may even be like, a doctor, a lawyer, like the people in our society who tend to be, we put them on pedestals as being the ones who know everything, a professor. But at some point, you have to give your own self sovereignty and credit for being a wise person who is strong and solid and an adult and actually has intuition and knows what's right for yourself. So that's the first thing I would say. But then the second
Mhm.
thing I would say is you also just have to get to know yourself, because so much of the world is distracting, right? There's distractions everywhere. And it's really challenging to stop the distractions and just make time to be quiet and go within yourself. And some people do that through meditation. Some people practice silent retreats. Um, just anything that can shut off all that outer noise and give yourself space to, I would say, to like fall in love with yourself, really. Like, how
Yeah.
do you learn to love yourself? And when you can do that, and the way you learn to love yourself is you spend time with yourself, you get to know you. Like, what makes me happy? What do I enjoy? What do I love? What really lights me up? If I had no time pressures and I could do anything, what would I do? Would I go paint? Would I go for a walk? Like, who am I? What do I love? What lights me up? And the more you learn about yourself, the more you're going to realize, wow, I'm pretty cool. I'm a pretty cool person. And once you start to really love who you are and learn who you are, it's a lot easier to start listening to yourself and to who you are. And so then, and I'll just say one more thing. The last thing I'll say is, if you can consciously separate the difference between your mental chatter and your deeper wisdom. And I believe your deeper wisdom is not just in your mind, it's this whole interconnected part of you. It's going into that place inside that is the divine connection, your higher self, the part of you who has the wisdom to really know at a high level what is right for you, what's best for you. And if you don't have a practice in place to regularly go there and take refuge there and touch in there, that would be the third thing I would recommend is develop that practice. Develop, even if it's 5 minutes in the morning when you wake up, just to go intentionally go within and say, okay, where's my inner room? You know, in the Christian Bible, Matthew 6, they'll talk about your inner room. Go into the inner room to pray, right? Like that's one way it's talked about. But you know, all of the traditions go there. All of the interfaith traditions go. They know how to get into that place of stillness or quiet or silence where it's just infinite peace. And my recommendation would be recommendation number 3 is find a practice that lets you 5 minutes, just go there, hang out, and just be in something more expansive than the story that your mind is creating for you in the drama of the moment.
Thank you for sharing that. And before we go ahead, I just want to say hi to Reverend Jocelyn, who's watching right now. And she's our colleague in the International Metaphysical Ministry. And let me share our new link to my wall because I want more people watching this. So I and more people can actually participate with the discussion that you're sharing because I'm very sure if more people were actually just comfortable
Yes.
having this conversation online, then uh, you'll be getting more responses.
Well, and maybe let's, put that in the comments too. If you're listening to this, if you have a something that you do in your life that allows you to connect into your inner, like what I call building your inner compass, but what are your practices or what have you learned over time that has allowed you to go in and listen to yourself and what's right for yourself from within rather than all the noise from outside? I'd love for people to add that into the comments and just, let's share wisdom with each other, because what's interesting is we've all had journeys. Like everybody has a story. This happens to be mine, and I happen to write mine down in this book called Gay the Pray Away. But everybody here has a really fascinating, interesting story, and we've all had to learn tools and tricks and techniques to deal and cope and get free from whatever baggage we've developed and picked up over time. So I'd love to read other people's comments on what they do for this.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's funny because now it's not again, it's acting up. You know what I mean, what we talked about earlier. So, anyway, thank you, Reverend Jocelyn, for sharing the link. And I'm going to make sure that we reach more audience. So, anyway, Reverend Erica, I'm very happy that you talked about tuning in and that integrated system because I'm not sure if you practice yoga, but it's something that I love doing as well because we know from yoga that you have a gut brain, heart brain, and a head brain.
Yes.
And because I am also part of the Global Coherence Initiative, we talk about the power of the heart and why we should listen to it and why we should actually harness our heart's intelligence. So please talk more about it because this is something that is not part of our common education system
Yes.
around the world. Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm
So
very
true.
sure. Yeah,
So
please
true.
go
I mean,
ahead and share.
I wish more people talked about this or taught this. My experience with listening to my heart was kind of a funny one. My mind had been speaking so loudly for so long that when I went on a retreat, it was a meditation retreat, and the whole goal of that was to listen to your heart. Like that was the type of meditation we were doing. It was like heart centered, heart listening meditation. We were using some of Robert Cidello's work, which is the silence of the heart. And the funniest thing happened to me when I got quiet and listened to my heart. I almost didn't hear anything. It was so quiet, so silent, and so small. And they talk about it again, like referencing just the Christian Bible, for example, that still small voice. And so I guess the thing I would tell people is if you're going to start trying to listen into your heart, just be prepared that it may not be the loud ego voice of your mind, right? Like your mind, my mind anyways, it yells at me. It speaks very loudly. Gives me opinions all the time of what I should do, what I should think, what I should feel. It has a lot to say. The heart is different. It's like the heart is, it's so confident and so just still and calm and quiet that you have to listen in differently. It's a different listening. So I guess I would just say that as you start to learn how to listen to your heart, be prepared that it may not communicate with you in the same way that your mind does. And one of my favorite practices, like yoga, I'm so glad you mentioned yoga because that's a great way to tap into the heart. There's another practice I would recommend, using music and dance. There's a practice I do called Journey Dance in the States. It is a global practice. You can look it up online, Journey Dance. But what's interesting about Journey Dance is there's a part in the dance where you actually are dancing with your heart, and but the music helps create a portal to get you into that place. And it's almost like your heart opens up in a way because of the music. The music can kind of open your heart a little bit, and you can get a deeper connection to your heart if there happens to be, if you're having a hard time connecting, see if music can get you there. And oftentimes it's music that is very emotional, right? So like
Yeah.
it might be music that has piano or orchestral strings, right? Like violins and cellos and things like those kinds of things that really evoke the heart to open up. All right, we got somebody saying Journey Dance
Yes.
sounds interesting. Yeah, it is. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. You go through a whole emotional journey in about an hour, and it's a great way to, if you don't know how to get into your body, like I had to learn how to get into my body because, so some of us who have experienced, queer persecution, it's not safe to be in your body. So, I made a habit out of kind of living in my mind where it was safe, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really embody myself in a certain way. And one of the things, a practice like Journey Dance or movement, it could be yoga, it could be dance, could be something. It got me back into this body, and like you said, Rev Reg, that is where the wisdom is, right? The wisdom's all in here. If we only live out of this, we're missing 2/3 of all the wisdom that our body has to offer. Not to mention the divinity part. So let's call it three. You're missing 3/4 of the wisdom because you're missing the divinity connection too.
Yeah. And that's such a beautiful thing that you mentioned. And, you mentioned something that I want to highlight, which is you embody yourself because it's true. It's something that a lot of us have been programmed that we have to be a certain way, act a certain way, speak a certain way. And I love that you brought it up because every time I try to become more of myself, other people are intimidated. But I always go back to what Marian Williamson said, that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Who
Yes.
are we not to be talented, brilliant, something like that. And it goes
Yes.
a long way with her affirming the God power within us and God's presence within us. And I love that she talked about it, and that's why, Reverend Erica, I think what you're doing is so important because one of the things that I realized for the LGBTQ that is very difficult to handle is the fact that every time you're trying to live your greatest life, it's it's inevitable that you're going to meet someone who's actually going to say that you're being arrogant or you're so full of yourself. And it takes a lot of courage and determination to live from that space of fullness
Yeah.
when all these people are trying to take you down. Because number one, you're going against what their religious bias is teaching.
Yes.
And another thing is you're breaking away from the conventions of your family most often than not.
Yes.
And at the same time, you, as a person who was trying to build your confidence up growing up, here you are having to deal with all those things. And that's why, you know what, a lot of the interviews that I have done, we always agreed with a couple of things. Number one was agreeing that we always felt that we had to go the extra mile so that we didn't have to go through the awkward conversations about our preference, gender preference. And at the same time, people will just appreciate us for the work that we were doing. So, uh, there's some. in a way it is good, but in a way it's also limiting because you kind of go into the zone of performance anxiety. So please share more about it.
Yeah, I put me on the list for that one because I talk about that in the book too. That was one of the ways I knew that I started to realize that I was still carrying around some wounding. And it was because I was using my life to try to prove I was worthy of other people's approval. Basically, I was trying to gain other people's approval through my actions, and I was overcompensating because I'm like, all right, well, I have this flaw with me because I'm gay, so let me work extra hard to do, like, all the volunteer things and all of the generous things and all of the, do the careers that everybody was like, whoa, you do that, the things that would make people feel like I must be Saint Teresa or whoever, like just really above and beyond. And it wasn't really from a place of, like, I have a good heart, and it was from a place of love, but it was also from a place of lack, and it was from a place of wanting people to tell me that I'm a good person, that I'm lovable, because I was still trying to override the old messages that I wasn't a good person, that I wasn't lovable. So yes, I can relate to that. The thing I would say in opposition to that, or in healing for that, is you quoted Marianne Williamson and you quoted the beginning of that passage. But if you ever read the passage all the way through, it ends by saying, when we have the courage to show up, we unconsciously give other people the permission to do the same. And so that's sometimes what keeps me going when I feel like, oh, I'm so scared to put myself out there right now because I don't want to deal with all these people outside of me, judging me or telling, having opinions about what I say or what I do or who I show up as. I mean, society can be very critical, and you could try to put yourself out there and do something good, and it may be threatening, like you said, Rev. It may be threatening to people, and so they're going to want to put you back in your place.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's when I think of the second part of that Marianne Williamson quote, which is, but if I can do it, I can unconsciously give other people permission to shine their light as well. And so, maybe there's one person who sees me do it who says, wow, if she can do that, I can do that. I can shine my light then if she's willing to shine hers.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. And Reverend Justin was saying, honestly, I admire you. I admire all your courage. And Reverend Nikki is here saying, I'm on, yes. So, anyway, thank you all for participating. Please share this to your wall if possible. We have so many friends who are part of the LGBTQ community, and some are actually in the closet. Reverend Erica, when I made a post in the IMM circle, first there were a lot of reactions from the community of LGBTQIA, but there were also a lot of reactions uh, from parents, and some actually just sent me a private message because they didn't want to indulge in the chat.
Yeah.
Uh, and at the same time, I also want to share that there are still other people, regardless of age, who are not yet proud enough to come out of the closet. And for some people, they're just not yet ready to be in that psychological space, have conversations with their friends and family about it. And for some, it's actually the fear of violent
Yeah.
threats
Yeah.
that might happen. So it's a different dimension that people are actually experiencing simultaneously around the globe. So what can you say, Reverend Erica? Because there are different levels into experiencing your fullness of self. Because especially people have to take into consideration what you mentioned earlier. Society wants to put you back in the place where they think you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to tell you a story. When I wrote my book, so when I was growing up in Texas, I was a basketball player. That was my sport. And I had a lot of coaches going through the years, and I always assume, the coaches, like, we had a connection, we had a kinship, and it was always assumed that they were lesbians, but in the closet, because it wasn't safe for them to be lesbians in the place I grew up. So when I wrote my book, they saw it on Facebook that I had written my book, and they reached out to me and asked me if we could have a Zoom meeting. And I just assumed, okay, they want to get on a Zoom meeting to, like, maybe congratulate me for my book or whatever. And we got on the Zoom meeting, and what they wanted to do was to actually come out to me. And it was really like, it was very moving emotionally, because these are women who are probably 30 years my senior, maybe more than 30
Yes,
years my
yes.
senior. And they are still closeted at this point in their life, because there's all those messages they got earlier in their life told them it isn't safe to come out. One of them has come out, one of them has stayed closeted. And it was really interesting for them to feel safe enough to share their story with me, because I shared my story. So they felt like they could now tell me. But at the same time, I really, it made me really think that there are still people who don't feel that this is safe for them to come out. And so the first thing I'd say is, it may not be safe, and you have to be real about that. You have to be realistic about that. I don't, if you're worried about if you're worried about being murdered for being gay, you might not, this might not be the right time for you to come out. I know that, what happened to me happened 20 years ago. I went through conversion therapy over 20 years ago. And at that time, I really felt like I needed to move. I needed to be in a different area, because if I would have stayed in that area of the country where I was living, it was too, I would never be understood. I would never find the people who would embrace me. Everyone would always be thinking there was something wrong with me. So
Yes, it,
what's that?
yes. I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah. So one of my solutions was actually moving to another part of our country where it's just a more open-minded population, a little more liberal population, where there were other people that looked like me who I could, be in a community with, so that I didn't have to feel so alone. And yeah, for some, as Rev Jocelyn's saying, for some it's not safe or the right place. Yeah. And so you have to be real about that. And, I guess I would just say, then ask yourself the question, can you continue living like this? What's your game plan? What's your end game? Are you just going to, can you continue living in the closet the rest of your life? Is that the choice you need to make? Maybe it is. But maybe you can start making plans now to eventually get yourself to another situation where you can start to really be who you are in the world, and shine your light that you're here to shine.
That's such a beautiful thing, Reverend Erica. And thank you for sharing that, because, one of the most interesting conversations I had with my Kundalini yoga teacher was something like this. Not exactly the exact words, but the essence was, she was saying, I was thinking if the collective, sorry for the word, fucked up the LGBTQ community a lot, because I noticed that the LGBTQ, they're either in hiding or they would lie as a way of survival, which is a very good thing that I heard from her, because I realized that for such a long period of time, we all had to be in the survival space, where, because number one, you didn't actually feel comfortable around your family. So, because you didn't feel comfortable opening up to your family, then it's also very difficult for you to actually tell them the things that matter most to you. So, and as a result, most families think that as long as we're providing for you materially, then that's enough. Even if they're not in the space where the love is present, or where the emotional and mental support is there. What can you say about it, Reverend Erica?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's situation is so unique. I mean, in my case, it was actually that my parents loved me so much that this is going to be crazy, but they loved me so much they wanted me to go to conversion therapy. And the best way I can explain that is, because of their religious beliefs, the best love they could give me was to save me from going to hell, right? Because they thought, because
Yeah.
that's what their church told them, that I would go to hell if I was gay. So the most loving thing that they could do was, help me not be gay anymore. And so it wasn't like it was an act of love, even though it was harmful, and it didn't help me, and it gave me a bunch of these negative messages. So it's a very confusing and complicated situation. But I will tell you, just to give an example of the emotional toll that this takes on your life, I didn't know this, but it wasn't until there's one area of the United States, it's called Provincetown, and it's at the very tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And it's kind of known by P Town, but it's unofficially like it's a gay area of the country. It's very, very gay. San Francisco is similar, but San Francisco is everybody's there and gay, a lot of gay people. But Provincetown, P Town is like the gay mecca of the world. And so the first time I went to P Town, and I shouldn't say the world, of the US, the first time I went to P Town, it was the first time ever I had looked around a place and I was not the minority. I was actually the norm.
Oh,
And something crazy happened. I actually like I kind of crashed like physically just I just felt I was exhausted. I just fell asleep for a long period, like, longer than I would normally sleep. I just kind of crashed. And when I woke up, I realized, oh my gosh, it takes so much energy to always have to be not the normal one in a situation. So the rest of my life, I had put so much energy out trying to fit in, trying to always be on the vigilance of like, are these people going to accept me? Are they not going to accept me? Do I need to adjust who I am? Do I need to look a little more girly in this situation because there's somebody here who's not? I mean, like, I'm always a little bit on alert of like, okay, do I need to modify what I'm saying? Should I speak differently? And all of that adds up. It's like those little micro energetic things that are always happening inside of me, that the moment I went to P Town, I got to drop all that. I dropped all of the trying to fit in, all of the assessing, am I safe? Am I not safe? Can I say that? Can I not say that? Can I hold my girlfriend's hand? Can I not? It all dropped away. And it was just like, I could just be. And that state of just being and being like kind of normal and accepted and part of what I saw, like looking like everything else when I looked around, I realized, wow, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted from doing this for so long. So that was the first time I realized the energetic toll of being, I'm saying a gay person in a not gay world, but I think this is true for any kind of a marginalized population. When you're the minority, there are a lot of things you're always doing to try to fit the norm, right? This heteronormative
yeah.
culture. And it is an energetic drain. We don't realize it because we just do it instinctively and naturally all the time. But the minute you have a pause and you don't have to do those things for just a second, you realize, whoa, that is exhausting. I didn't realize it until I wasn't doing it.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. I love that you went through so much self work, inner work, because it takes a lot of self introspection to be able to say a mouthful about our topic for today. Thank you so much for doing it. And, even the part where you have to rewire your internalized conversations,
Constantly.
and you'll be able to actually bring it up for discussion is already very difficult on its own. But I'm glad that you're in this heart space where you've dealt with it. Now you're able to come to me and the rest of the audience in the fullness of your being, and at the same time be able to share the things that you've confronted over the years. And I also want to share to our audience, Reverend Dicky in Canada is saying, yes, back 35 years ago, I myself experienced beating for being different. And she also was saying, I would love to go there to P Town, yes. And so true, Reverend Erica. This was about the time you were talking about, having to be there in the space where you're going to constantly adjust your energy, thinking if I'm going to fit in, shall I adjust the way I talk? Shall I adjust the way I dress? Shall I look a little bit more girly? And yes, yes to all those things that you mentioned. So, I also want to highlight all the things that you mentioned, because for a lot of straight people, it's not just about the labels that people think, that people want to immediately uh, forget or take for granted, because they think it's really not that big of a deal.
Right.
But in truth, it's true what you said, because the moment I also left the space where I felt so limited about my self expression, that was also the same time that I was able to make breakthrough experiences for myself. And honestly, it's not easy, because there's the part where you have to be practical. And for a lot of people, they still live in situations where, because I'm getting paid for this.
Mm.
I have to hide my
Yes.
being
Yes.
gay.
Yes.
And for some people, especially in the celebrity world, like what Portia de Rossi mentioned, that because she thought she was an actress, she had to hide her being gay in order to make sure that she was going to pay for her bills. But
Yeah.
obviously, you're someone who's openly gay and is selling your book. And please tell us more about it. How you living from your authentic self will actually, get you paid as well and put you in a healthier psychological space. And we're not just talking about material comfort.
Yeah, I'm right with you. It's been a journey for me. When I grew up in Texas, and when I first came out of college, I was still figuring out who I was, and I didn't know. I didn't have all the answers. I had a lot of ideas of who I was based on what was around me, based on the world that I grew up in. And so, so I went and worked for in an industry that as I learned more about myself, I realized like, whoa, I don't want to do that anymore. It doesn't feel in alignment with me. And so it really became a question of finding my alignment and finding the things that are in alignment for me. And it took a journey. It took me trying things out, but trying them out outside of the context of the programming of the situation I was in to feel like, do I like this? Do I not like this? And one of the ways I knew was if I felt embarrassed to tell somebody what I did or something about myself, that was an indicator for me of, oh, I'm probably out of alignment. If I don't feel comfortable saying what I do for a living or saying what I do, just anything, whatever about myself, that's probably an indicator that I'm out of alignment. And so it's been, meditation helped a lot with this too. Just getting quiet and really going within and just getting to a place of calm where I was calm enough that I could start to say like, okay, so now let me bring this job into my calm, quiet heart space. And how do I really feel about this job? If I take away all the noise, if I stop looking at the paycheck, if I stop looking at all these other things, how do I actually feel about this? And it's been a big guide for me to help me find my place in the world. And to your point, is it worth it to live in your authenticity, especially if you have to let things go? I've had to let some opportunities go, but when I tried to do them, they just weren't. I wasn't happy. And like Rev, you're into metaphysics. I'm into metaphysics. A lot of the listeners here are into metaphysics. There is something out there about attraction, right? The way energy
Mm.
attracts and resonates, and people can feel if you're not in alignment. People can feel that. They may not have words for it, they may not know what they're feeling, but something feels off. And so I would argue, and I have experienced, you'll never really be as fully successful as you could be if you're in your authentic self. So if you're kind of out of alignment, but you're like, you know what, this is a sacrifice I have to make in order to pay that bill or keep that job or um, you know do that thing. I've experienced in my life, and I've seen in other people's lives, that something eventually is going to not it's going to keep you from being able to do that. Either your health is going to fail because your body is like, whoa, you're so
Yes.
out of alignment, we can't do this anymore. Or you won't show up to clients in the same way. Like clients will realize like, whoa, something's not right. I don't trust this person because their energy it's not in alignment. It's like this, it's not like this. And I have found that when I really allowed myself to get here and I stopped worrying about being taken care of, like, oh, what am I going to do for money? I just trusted the universe. Like, look, if I'm myself and I'm doing the work only I can do and shining the light that only I can shine, that I'm going to be able to be, I'll be rewarded for that. And people will feel my authenticity and they'll be drawn to that resonance of energy that I'm giving off because the energy is aligned. People will be magnetized to that energy because it's so in alignment. It feels good to people to be in that kind of energy, and it doesn't feel as good to be in the energy of like, you know.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. And by the way, Dr. Ro is saying hello, watching from the other side. And this
I
is
wonder
so
what other
true.
what other side are we talking about here? That almost sounds like they're, is that like a message from the spirit world, I wonder?
Here in the Philippines, actually.
Oh, good. Yay. Hello, Dr. Rowe.
And also from Reverend Jocelyn. This is so true. When you were talking about that energy is felt by people you're working with. And It's so amazing. I think we're gonna have more discussions like this, especially you talked about the level of fulfillment. You
Yes.
know, you may
Yeah.
be fulfilled financially, and a lot of people don't actually want to come out in the closet because they feel that they're going to have financial suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
And compared to thinking, you know what, if I live from my true authentic self, that's actually the thing that's going to get me paid what my true worth. And
Yes.
I really believe it, that the pay doesn't just have to come from because you forced yourself into it, but because you're living your full authentic self and you're doing your soul's purpose every single day. And because of that, the infinite mind of God is just rewarding you with everything that is really truly meant for you. It's not even a reward because we know that God has already given us everything. But it's more of aligning to that thing that we would most enjoy experiencing. So, anyway, Reverend Erica, one of the things that I truly admire and respect about you and your work is that you have studied God from the perspective of interfaith. Uh, and not a lot of people would actually bother to do it because they feel loyal to their path. But actually, for me, I respect people who are loyal to their path. But I also felt in my adult life it's important to understand God from a multifaceted perspective, because if not, it's where the difficulty in relating to each other comes in.
Mm.
So please share more about it, because just like you, I also have that shared experience, that perspective. I should be able to understand God as creative intelligence from multiple perspectives, and it makes me more relatable and better able to understand other people, because this isn't common practice.
Yeah, no, right on. I mean, even I just have to read you this because like just what you talked about, this is a line from the Upanishads. You are what your deep driving desire is. As your desire is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. As your deed is, so is your destiny. So like that kind of wisdom is it's in all of these traditions. There is wisdom there, and that speaks exactly to what we were just talking about before. Like, what destiny do you want? Do you want the one where you're living in line with your truest desire, or do you want one where you're kind of just trying to fit into somebody else's rules for your life? And you know, it's the wisdom traditions all point to this same thing about figure out why you're here. What's your purpose here? How do you best align with your highest path and purpose, with the divine mind of creation, so that you can be in that creation? And it, to me, it's very important from a like to explore these different religious traditions has been very healing for me, because when I was only looking through the lens of Christianity, and when I was only looking at it through the lens that my parents and my home church had given me, it was too small. I mean, we are these infinite beings. Like my shirt says limitless. We are
Mhm,
these
mhm.
limitless infinite beings. And if we stay too narrow in one box, it's too easy to forget that or lose sight of it or have a very small view of ourselves and why we're here. And by looking into different traditions and finding the wisdom in the different traditions, it's allowed me to expand and expand and expand my view of God, my view of myself, my view of life, my view of the way the world works and how to work with it and how to be in flow with it. So I've just found nothing but a welcoming environment by exploring out, by expanding my view and exploring outside of the box. And so I would highly recommend find something that works for you. And it's interesting because all of the wisdom traditions have mystical components to them, every one. Judaism has the Kabbalah. Christianity has the Christian mystics. Islam has the Sufis. And so it goes on. Most of Hinduism already is pretty mystical. So like you can find these more mystical parts of the tradition, which are less about the literal and more about the direct experience of yourself with the cosmos, with God, with the universe, with divine energy. And those can be more doorways to get into discovering who you are and who you are in relation to the universe. Oh, I don't know if I can't hear you or if you went to mute, but there we
All
go.
right. Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. And I also want to highlight on why it's so important for the LGBTQIA to find some alignment to God, Almighty Source, higher power, whatever it is. Because honestly, I have been able to find myself divinely protected and blessed because of that alignment with source energy. And for other people, it's so difficult for them to absorb because they automatically would say, but you're gay and you're a minister and you're a hypocrite, because according to their faith, a gay person who is openly and actively in a relationship is actually immoral. What can you say about it?
This is one of my biggest missions. One of my biggest missions is helping the LGBTQ community find their own relationship with spirituality. And I believe it's so important because I actually believe we're all spiritual beings and we're just having human experiences. That's really like at our essence, we are spiritual beings. We are divine sparks here to be a representation, a physical representation of the universe experiencing itself, right? And love experiencing itself. So if we're not able to tap into our true essence, which is that spirituality, we're going through life as, like earlier you talked about 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional. I believe we're going through life just 2-dimensional with when we don't have the spiritual component. And the sad
Yeah.
thing, the tragedy is that because of the harms that certain faith traditions and religions have perpetrated on the LGBT community, a lot of us in the community threw out everything. We threw out faith, we threw out religion, and we threw out spirituality with it. And it's such
Yes.
a loss because we then as a community end up going through life without such a deep source of support and resources, when of all people who need the support and resources, it's us. Like if we've been told we're not lovable by parts of the world, by people in the world, we have access to a source of love that is so much deeper and so much more fulfilling than that misunderstood version of love, if we would just allow ourselves to tap into it. But it's hard because there's the anger and there's the, it's just, it almost feels like I don't want that because they didn't want me. And
Yes.
my goal is to help the queer community find doors into spirituality that are maybe different than they've experienced before, and that are accessible and that are way bigger than the versions that they might have been told that were harmful to them in the first place.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a powerful thing that you're mentioning. And uh, Reverend Jocelyn was just saying, I think most indeed are afraid of the financial suicide. Folks fail to recognize that with the alignment comes fulfillment. And Dr. Ru, you are what your deep driving desire is. Awesome. And this is powerful. And yes, it is. So thank you so much for all of that, Reverend Erica. And another thing that I want to highlight with what you said, with all the discrimination that people felt over the years, and they threw out that spirituality, their spiritual practices, then another thing that Paul Willis, a colleague of ours who's also into healing and coaching the LGBTQ community, was saying, a lot of the LGBTQ community have unhealthy personal practices like excessively drinking or, having unhealthy habits because of that psychological space that wasn't really addressed in the growing up phase. Because when we think of growing up or adulting, we're just thinking it's about you from being a small kid to your grown up self, which is normally devoid of the psychological aspect. But we know that if people actually tended to that psychological maturity, nourishment, also it helps people to be in that healthier frame of mind, especially when you become an adult. It's not just about paying the bills. There's more to becoming an adult than just paying the bills. What can you say about it, and why do we need to nourish ourselves spiritually and psychologically at the same time continuously.
Yeah, I have such a story about this. One of my biggest lessons on this journey has been that when I change, things do change around me. Like I can't change somebody else. I tried to change my mom for 20 plus years to get her to, see things differently, see faith differently, see religion a little bit bigger. I could never get her to change. So instead, I started working on me. I started working on changing myself. And I was doing a hypnotherapeutic based practice that was based on something called NLP, neuro linguistic programming, right? So these are some psychological techniques that counselors will use or therapists will use. And I had a therapist working with me doing an NLP based technique. And we were looking at my timeline in a hypnotic state. And we got stuck right around my teenager years. My inner teenager was there. My little child, my little teenager was there and was very angry. And I noticed that my teenager was like throwing a fit and was like, no, we're not doing this process anymore. We're stopping. And so the therapist had me take my inner teenager and bring my higher self in. And so now my inner teenager is here, my higher self came in, and the therapist had me take the inner child, the inner teenager, and grow her up to today, where she was now merged with me, the adult, where she has all of the wisdom, the compassion, the knowledge, the strength, the experience, like everything I have today as the adult that I am. Get my inner teenager to be that, to merge with that person rather than be stuck in my teenager self. So I did this process, grew up my teenager in my mind's eye to today. 4 days later, I'm not kidding with you, 4 days later, my mom sent me an email out of the blue saying, this email is long overdue. That was the subject line. This email is long overdue. And the email went on to say, I'm so sorry for what happened when you were younger. I'm so sorry that I chose religion over you. I'm so sorry that I couldn't see things in this way. I wish I knew then what I know now. I love you exactly as you are. I see you for who you are. Like basically my dream list of everything I've ever wished she would say to me. Mm-hmm. And when I thought about it, when I received that email and I thought back to what I had just done to grow my inner child up, I realized that inner teenager on an energetic level had my mom by the neck with her face in the carpet for 20 years on the energetic plane, was just holding her there saying, yeah, you will never do this again. You will be sorry for what you did. You will, like, I was just holding her for 20 years in the carpet. And when I grew up my teenager, it's like I let go of her in the energetic plane. I let go of her. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And because I let go of her, she also was able to grow herself up to today. And it was amazing. Just by me doing that inner work of letting go, growing up my inner teenager, she responded. She grew up too on a whole across the country. We never talked about this. There was no conversation that happened on any physical plane. It was all done in the energetic space because I shifted, she shifted, and we had this miraculous healing. So I cannot say more powerfully how much doing the inner work, it actually does matter. And while people listening to this may never have the miraculous healing with whoever people in their life they have issues with, I'm not even saying it's about the outcome, but little things will change in your life. When you do inner work, things will start to shift in your life in one way or another, and you'll start to notice it, and you'll have more peace within yourself as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Erica. Dr. Ro was just saying, I love that, doing the inner work, awesome. The power of inner work. And this is so awesome when Reverend Jocelyn was listening to you. So, anyway, I trust that I'm going to have you again for another episode. And of course, we're going to have a new show called Color Celebrate Diversity with you and the rest of our friends in IMM. And I want to thank you so much for working on yourself a lot, because now that you're in your fully confident, complete version of yourself, it's making a huge impact on me and, of course, the rest of the viewers. And I trust that more people will get to know you. And I'll do my best to have the people from my side know more about you, especially if they're coming from the queer community, because you have such a gift to share to the world and you are such a beautiful soul. Thank you so much, Reverend Erica. And I always end the show. If there's one thing that you want me and the rest of the viewers to take note of, what would that be so that we can take action immediately?
Yeah, I always like to end with this particular story It's kind of like a mission statement. I really believe that those of us, and whether it's queer people or not, any one of us who has experienced a situation where the system around us didn't quite fit. It was too small, right? Like you got some messages that you didn't belong here, who you were didn't fit, it wasn't okay. We all had to go on a journey because of that, right? Like, so for the queer ones of us, we had to go through that journey of being rejected and then figuring out who we are, coming into feeling good about who we are, and then re-emerging on the other end to go into the world as our whole selves. What's fascinating is because humanity is raising in consciousness, more and more people are bumping into systems, and the systems are starting to crumble before their eyes. So like for me and you and all the other queers on here, the system already crumbled before our eyes. That religious system already crumbled before my eyes when it couldn't accept me. So I had to deal with that. But now people like my parents are starting to realize the system's crumbling before their eyes too. And it's fascinating because I realize, wow, I can be a guide now. So can you. So can you others in the queer community who have had to go through this journey. We can now look back to these people, and ironically, in some cases, it's the same people who were our persecutors 20 years ago. We now can reach out a hand to them and say, look, you're about to go on a journey. You're about to have to deal with a system of belonging, a system of identity, a system of telling you who you are crumbling before your eyes. And you're going to have to rebuild from that. You're going to have to figure out who you are and come out the other end. And I can show you it's possible. You can do this. You will not die. Look, I made it. You can make it too. And so I really see a future where those of us in the queer community, the marginalized communities, are going to be leading the way because we know how to ride that wave of systemic just breakdown. We know how to ride that wave, and we can help others now as our systems have to crumble to make space for the bigger, more expansive humanity that we're all becoming.
Thank you so much for what you just shared. It's such a beautiful thing to uh, ponder on, especially Reverend Nikki is saying thank you so much to you both. And thank you, Reverend Nikki, for being here. You know, I think we have so much value to share to the rest of the queer community, especially the ones who are still in their path of finding their true alignment with their true selves. And at the same time, if ever somebody wants to work with you for your workshops and your monthly gay the pray events, where can they find you and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of the ways, if you want to just kind of navigate this journey yourself, grab this book, Gay the Pray Away. It guides you through the rainbow path. If you don't love reading, but you like to listen to things, it's also on audiobook. If you go to Audible or any of your favorite places to get an audiobook, you can have me read the book to you, and that's sometimes more fun. And then secondly, if you want to work with me, or if this is resonating with you and you're like, wow, I wish there was a guide who could just help me through my spiritual awakening journey, you can find me. I'm on Instagram at Rev Erika Allison. And you can find my website at reverikaallison.com. And I guess the last thing I would say is I do have a monthly gathering. It's totally free. It's meant to be a really welcoming space for the queer community to explore their spirituality. It's called Gay the Pray. We take the pray and we just make it really gay. Gay the Pray, and you can go to gaythepray.com and learn more about the next upcoming event, and hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Reverend Justin was just saying, thank you both. This was certainly enlightening. So thank you all so much. And uh, Reverend Erica, I'll meet you again in the back room. So Satnam, everyone. Thank you so much all for tuning in. You know, every time the LGBTQ topic is brought up, it's actually LGBTQ plus now. Every time someone brings it up for a conversation, there's more to it than just making people think that it's all in their head and they should just delete it. It's not as easy as a lot of people project it is, especially if they're not the ones who are going through the process. So I trust you're able to pick up a perspective from Reverend Erica's talk today. And personally, for me, I love that she talked about you literally have to pull yourself away from an environment that isn't really supportive of you, because that's one of the best ways to actually bring out your full potential. So remember to put things in perspective, because your perspective shapes your reality. Mabuhay everyone and have fun.